So what is straw bale building? Obviously, it's building with straw. And then we're using natural plasters as the finish on the inside and the outside. It's a beautiful, sustainable, easy system to understand. And that's why I like it. I got my first project in 2002 that was straw bale building, and I haven't stopped since. I live in a straw bale building, and I've done probably on average one a year for the past 20 years. The way that we build right now is really wrong-headed. Everything is encased in a plastic bubble. Toxins are trapped. There's all kinds of materials in construction that off-gas, and it causes people to be more sick. As our buildings get more sophisticated, we are trapping toxins in there. We're adding the need for extra ventilation and a bunch of other issues, trapping moisture in the building, causing mold, and all these problems that we've never seen in older buildings. Straw bale construction with the natural plasters has a different methodology. It's a building that actually breathes while providing a wonderful insulation. So the insulation that we get here is at least double what the requirement is by code for current building standards. But because we're using the natural plasters and a natural material, there's no toxins in it. Everything is natural, and we can reduce our carbon load. Straw actually sequesters carbon within it. Again, it's another way to protect the environment, and it grows in one season, locally. No trucking involved across the country for this material. Because the wall breathes, we don't need to add extra mechanical ventilation, and we don't need to add electricity to make that all work. And by using clay plasters in specific, the clay actually pulls extra moisture into itself, away from the bale and away from the environment, and it creates a finished space indoors that controls the humidity to about 30 to 40%, which is perfect for what you want to live in. So in humid times of the year, pulls moisture in. When it dries out, it releases that back to you and keeps it a moderated humidity. You never have to use a humidifier or a dehumidifier in straw bale buildings. It's always comfortable. It also allows anything that you might have that's toxic in the environment to eventually breathe through the building. You can think of it mostly how we build right now is like a rain slicker. It's a plastic thing that traps everything inside it. This is more like a Gore-Tex coat. Moisture, vapor, air can go through, but because it goes through very slowly through the plasters and the straw, it's holding enough of the heat in and creating a good barrier for our energy efficient building. I like it because it's very, very simple. Put a bale down, plaster it on both sides, and you're done. Yes, it breathes. You can't put like a latex paint on it. So there are some issues with, kind of finishing that you would want to do on the outside and the inside, because it always has to be able to breathe. You don't want to trap moisture in it.
So what's the final finish then?
The final finish will be a lime-based plaster. And to that lime-based plaster, you can add pigment, you can do lime washes, you can do colors, you can carve it, shape it. It can be anything you want. It can be very flat, finished surface, or it can be a wavy, expressive surface. Yes, you can use natural-based paints. It works best if you have a lime finish with a lime-based paint or a fresco technique. But yeah, and frequently, if you want a really smooth finish, you can also add either soap and rub that into the finished surface, or you can use a linseed oil and oil it down and get a kind of a slicker, really soft, beautiful finish to it. It's one of the most flexible materials that I've ever worked with in terms of its workability. You can also use Portland-based cement. It does take more energy to produce Portland-based cement, so I prefer not to use it so much. The workability of the Portland-based cement is also a lot more challenging because it dries a lot quicker. You do have a scheduling issue. This is probably the biggest problem working with natural plasters, is they take a long time to dry, especially in humid environments. So in order for them to dry and cure properly, you need 2 months before it hits hard freeze for multiple days. So we're right up against the window here working on the outside. The outside is pretty much done with the first coat, and that's going to sit The scratch coat will sit till spring until it's warmed up again before we add any more coats onto it. The interior we can work a little bit more. But it takes up to 60 days really to set up enough to be capable of surviving through the winter. So I like using hydrated lime because it's the easiest. So that is a lime bag that as soon as you mix with water, it's ready to go. There's a couple of other limes that you can use. You can use just about any type of building clay lime, but the other types you have to slake and you have to let them soak ahead of time and prepare them for a couple of months until they're ready, and then you get a lime putty and you work with that into the mix. This is a lot easier just working with the dry hydrated lime.
But the dry form, is that lime is a mineral, it's a ground mineral?
So lime is it's a limestone product. They grind it up and they heat it. So there is some energy required to make lime plaster. But it's a material that's been used, I think the earliest archaeology evidence of lime and clay plasters is 9,000 years old. So it stands the test of time and it will last. Other things that happen if you just use clay and sand plasters, it doesn't wear quite as well, especially in our climate where we have really heavy rains. So for our area, I like to use a lime-based finish plaster. It just gives a better protection. If we're using a lime-based finish plaster, it's better to include a little bit of lime into the first mix because it adheres to itself better. You can do it over a straight clay sand mix, but it sticks better. So what are the mixes? I'm starting to talk already about the mixes. It's very simple. We use clay and sand, and in this case we're using chopped straw since we have it. You can get creative. You can use such things as horsehair or any kind of binders. You can even use toilet paper to mix your own plaster at home. And then that's the basic earth and plaster mix. Clay, sand, a binder such as chopped straw, and water. Mix it all up. It's also the same mix for adobe bricks. So it's a system that works together, materials that work together harmoniously. We can add a little bit of lime in to create a slightly harder surface, and then it's better when we finish it with lime. For our area, I really like that. But the lime content varies from about 7 to maybe up to 15%. So minimal content of lime with that.
So is lime used on the outside, which is already done?
Lime is used in the finish coat. So we're doing at least 2 coats. What's up there right now has lime in it. And these here, we're standing in front of patches that we did probably 3 or 4 weeks ago. Because I can't give you an exact ratio mix. All the clay varies a little bit, so you have to test it. You can even dig it up from your ground if you have clayey soils, and a lot of people around here do. If you do have clayey soils, you really want to refine and test quite a bit to make sure that you have good clay and that it's working for the purposes that you need it to. That's the other benefit of it, is very, very cheap material to work with. The labor takes a little bit more time, but if you're doing it yourself, it's the cheapest thing you can get because you can dig it right from your own ground. So here we have our test patches, and the bottom row, all we did was test just the sand and the clay mix. That's where I like to start. Once I get the ratio of the sand to clay, then we can work and see about adding that extra content of lime and do that. We started with 1:1. I almost always start with 1:1 sand to clay, and it usually works pretty good. And on both sides here we've got a 3:4 and a 2:3, adding more sand into the mix. The more sand you can add, the less potential cracking you might get. So you want to reduce the clay to the workable stage that you can push into the wall that will adhere. If you can reduce the clay amount, go for it. It makes for a better, more hardy surface. But here we're left with 1:1, which is a pretty common ratio for the mix. And then above these 2 patches we started adding in lime into the mix. So this one was a very wet sample. We added more water. It was easier to push in, and this was quite a dry sample just to test them. But both of them are fine at adhering. Because we're working with a professional plaster crew who did the exterior work, I wanted them to have ability to adjust it to their preference in terms of the firmness of the mix and workability of it. It's very easy. You don't have to have a degree in anything to make this, and you make it right with your hands. So if there's any other questions, without further ado, we can start mixing a batch and seeing how that goes in. Yeah, I just want to talk about putting it on the wall. You can put it on the wall with your hands. I'm going to demonstrate this before because I won't be dirty. So you put it on the hock and you scoop it up, and then as you're pushing it in, because this has some give to it, you really want to push it, and you want to keep your trowel with the pushing up with the angle here, so the following edge is pushing in, and as you get less on material, you rotate it up, but you never lead with this top line angled because you want to be able to glide it into the surface. And you'll notice we're putting it straight onto the bales. Some people think you need a substrate to put it on. You need some kind of lath or chicken wire. I find that actually doesn't work as good because it tends to push it away from the straw. The straw grabs the stuff real well. You can just grind it in there. You can do it also with the palm of your hand in that same kind of up motion. So that's the application that we'll be doing, and you can try it with your hands or you can try it with the trowels. So let's do one, 2, 3, 4. Okay.
Yeah, this is the clay.
That's the clay. This is sand. And you can tell this is, yeah, and you can taste it too. It feels actually it's a legitimate test to see how your clay is. So and this is our sand, just regular building sand. So now we have 1-to-1, and I usually mix with this. We've been using 1-to-1 or this is 4-to-4 to 1 cup. So 1/4 lime. And do we have the chopped straw?
Yep.
So there's our lime. I should be wearing a mask for this. Do not breathe in lime. All right, so we're going to add some water into this mix first. And the mix that we've been using here, we've been doing about, like I said, 1-to-1 and 1/4 lime and half straw. So if we could get some clumps of straw put into that. So you can see it's blending very nice. Let's start with that. So you can chop it a number of different ways. You can use a weed whacker or whippersnipper lawn tool. You can run it through a chipper and then through a screen, about a 1/4 inch screen. So the straw is a binder, and it gives it strength to span and helps it reduce cracking. It also makes the mix a bit bulkier, so you can put a thicker application on. In the finished, I usually eliminate it, but if you like the look of the straw, you can have that in the finished plasters as well. There's a lot of different kinds of plasters you can make. So that's quite firm stuff. This would be nice for, has anybody ever heard of cob? So basically cob is the same stuff without the lime. So that's cob, or that's what adobe brick would be made out of as well. That's a little bit firm for pushing into the wall. So let's toss a bit more water into that.
Has anybody ever made octagon? No?
So we can test it by how sticky it is, and that's pretty sticky stuff. And also, if you can roll it, my hands are so messy, into like a sausage form. And if it's still pliable in that sausage form without breaking, that's kind of where we want to be with our mix. And that's also how you test your clay. So the lime is actually a hardener. It makes it a little bit harder finish. And you can do without lime. That works as well. But it's a little more long-lasting in our area, especially outside. So when you're trowel applying, again, you can use the hawk to help you. And you just want to angle it and push it in the wall. Yeah, it's about, I'd say 10 pounds of pressure, 6 pounds of pressure. And you just slap that on in and keep going. It'll take a week before it'll be firm enough that you can't poke it.
Okay.
You can make a lot of mistakes with this and it's still fine.
It's very forgiving.
And it teaches you. You know, if it all falls off in a big chunk, you've
Then
learned
you'll know.
something.
Okay.
Yeah. Really, that's why we do the test patches. So to see what happens over time, if they fall off, if they adhere, if they're good, if they feel stable. By using the plaster here, we're creating a 2-hour fire-rated structure. A normal house is no fire rating. This is a lot safer because the plaster keeps you from having fire issues. What we're using here is 1-to-1 sand to clay ratio, and then about up to 12% lime is added into that mix, and about a half a bucket into that of straw. But I think we're going to go a little bit up on the straw because it can take a little bit more straw mass, just watching what's going on here. So you'd like to get the straw mix up to as much as you realistically can, because it makes the mix a lot lighter and gives it good adhesion, holding the clay together. The particular recipe that we develop, you have to test it on site because the material clay isn't as produced as Portland cement would be. The components of what it is are not exact for every blend. So for every batch of clay that you have, you want to make sure that you get the right mix just so you get the product that you want. Some clay is really fine and sticky and good, and you can reduce the amount of clay in the mix and increase the amount of sand. But you always start with that 1-to-1 and then play with it up or down from there. I've always had good luck with a 1-to-1 blend, so that's usually where I start, and then decrease the amount of clay depending on how sticky it is. And in this case, we've nailed it right again on the 1-to-1 clay to sand. And then in addition to the clay and sand mix, which you can just use clay and sand, that's a good mix as well. But since we're finishing off with a lime mix, I like to add a little bit of lime in there. It helps the final coat of lime stick a little bit better. You want to go maybe 7 to 12% at the most added in of lime to that mix. The interior finish will be exactly the same as the exterior. It's the same as both. I like the straw and the clay plasters because it's so simple. Both sides are the same. The bales are the surface and the insulation, and then the clay. It's a really simple wall system to deal with. We use the same blend of plasters. So here you can see them just really pushing that mix right into the straw matrix. The straw, fibers of the straw really grab that clay mix well, and you just gotta give it a little bit of energy to shove it into there. And once you push it into the straw, it grabs it tight and holds that plaster right onto the wall. Once we get it applied, you want to smooth it down so that there's no gaps or breaks in the finish. And after it starts to set up a little bit, maybe in an hour or two, you come back and we'll add some scratch marks so that the final plaster will adhere better. The plaster mix, once it's on, it's going to take a long time to dry. So we need at least 60 days before hard freeze, or you have to protect it. And the plaster mix itself is going to take at least that time before it's okay in the temperature variations, which is why we really are locked into a time frame for construction for this type of building, because of how the property of this clay mix will dry. I don't think it'll be a problem here.
What do you mean, like
So,
the weight of it starts
Yeah,
pulling it? Or
yeah.
something?
But because we have studs, they're locked into the studs. I don't think it'll be a problem.
Okay.
When I did my house, I had long stretches of bales without any framing, and we didn't think about that.
Okay.
And it started to tip out of plumb.
Oh.
So if you see, I don't
Yeah,
think
if
it will.
starts protruding out or something.
Yeah, if you see it pulling out, then we've got it. Then we know that we have to do the inside simultaneously.
Oh, okay.
Here we have our bales, and here you see we've got some backing plywood as well as some lath on top of that. This is actually where the box for electrical is going, which is why we have that here. And we also use this lath wherever we have 2 studs or wider, or any other places we need to patch, because that will grip the clay. So they'll just come right in, go over that with clay. We only use the mesh where we have wood or some other material that the plaster has to go over. So you notice here we have our foundation, which is the ICF blocks, and then we have our plate and our straw wall. The plastering that we're doing today with the clay plaster is only going down to here, because we can't really use the clay plaster and lime plaster all the way down to the foundation. So this will be a different material down here. You can use it, it just doesn't wear quite as well close to the ground where you have water or snow deposits. We want something with a little bit of Portland down to cover the foundation. So our plaster today is just going to right where that foundation is starting.